We just left off talking about the total fertility rate, a really quick metric to really look at human population growth and how fast we're growing. Although the first graph we looked at humans growing crazy fast, adding another billion over a decade or 2 decades, we are seeing that our population growth is slowing down. We used to have, on average, 5 children per woman. Now we're at half of that. So that's really good in terms of the resource use. Another way we can analyze populations is looking at a tool called a population pyramid, given its name kind of because of its shape. Now, this focuses on all different ages within a population. So it looks at your newborns to the oldest people in your population. So it doesn't necessarily tell you how many children are being born per woman, but it gives you an idea of maybe some of the social issues that may be happening in that country. And you're like, well, what do social issues have to do with the environment? Well, they're actually a lot more connected than you think. So here's an example of a population pyramid that I have of China, and this was from a couple years ago. On one side of our graph, we have males, so that's these blue bars, and the green bars represent females. And on this graph, it says population in millions. And you can see on the left-hand side, we have these different age categories. So these are the individuals that are between the ages of 0 and 4, 5 and 9, 10 to 14, etc. And so, for example, so this says 63.7 is the max, meaning this bar right here, which is the maximum size, there's 63.78 million people. So it would be 63.78 million males, because we're looking on the male side, between the ages of 40 to 44. So that's kind of how you interpret this kind of graph. Now, look at just the top part of this graph. And if you notice, it's huge. It's really skinny at the top, not many old people, and then as it gets bigger and bigger at the bottom. And that's kind of alarming. And the reason that's alarming is at one point, this is what it looked like. Between 0 and 4 was these largest bars. And it was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, meaning more and more people, and these kids are having more and more kids. And so their population was growing so rapidly in China. Now the government saw this and was like, whoa, this actually has a really big problem. And the reason this is a problem is because that's a lot of people, which means they need a lot of resources. They need a lot of food. They need shelter. They need electricity. They need all of these things, but the country couldn't provide that. And so some of you may have heard of the one-child policy in China. And a lot of people criticized it, saying, how can you make it that couples only have one child? That should be their choice. And sure, there's that social issue of that, but from the government perspective and the environment perspective, it was a godsend. Like, our Earth would be so different if this policy was not in effect. Although China still has the largest population in the world, it could have been significantly larger. We can actually see the effects of the one-child policy looking at this population pyramid. Now, it was really huge, but you can already see a declining and even a stabilizing population. And you may think, well, again, like, how do people live like in that condition? I used to live in China. No one talks about it because no one really cares. And they kind of understand the importance of doing that. So although it may seem like a bad thing socially, for the environment and for the resources and really for the economic and social welfare of the country, actually made a huge impact. So that's one kind of just example population pyramid. And I'll show you 3 more that kind of shows you different shapes of population pyramids and what they can tell us about that population. So here's a population pyramid of Kenya, one of the countries in Africa that experiences a really high TFR, so a really high total fertility rate. You can see those of reproductive age, so between 15 to 25, their bars are kind of low, but you see that their offspring, the kids between 0 and 14, is really large, meaning they're having a lot of kids. And we saw that with the TFR rate. But as you can see, we talked about some of those issues of, even though you have a lot of kids, you also have a lot of mortality. So you're not seeing that many people that are, much older, very, very thin, and small populations on the top. You have some populations which are more stable, so they're not really growing and they're not really declining. The United States is one example of that. We do have some growth, but it's very, very small. You can see the shape of our population pyramid is actually quite different than our shape of Kenya, for example, where you're having offspring, and these offspring bars are a little bit larger than the reproducing adults, but not much. You can also see the difference in healthcare between our countries, where looking at that same older population, you can see we have a lot more individuals. You can also see that females live longer than males. Also, something really important to note, especially if you're a government and providing resources for your population. Then you also have countries that have no growth or are even declining in growth. And Italy is a great example, and Japan has recently been in the news a lot more. For the environment, kind of a good thing. This means, less people means less resources. Socially, there's actually quite a lot of issues. And there's a video you'll watch that kind of explores those issues. But here you can see that the adults, much larger population bars than our offspring. Our offspring, they're just not having as many. Could be for a number of reasons, but this can impact the social welfare of this country, because this means there's less people, working in fast food places, in grocery stores. You're essentially losing your job market, or at least it's getting smaller. So again, to really understand our environment, it's incredibly important to understand our human population growth, not just worldwide, but also in individual countries.